Support Center. We're really happy that you could join us this evening. And it is my honor to introduce our guest speaker, Will Pye. So Will is a social entrepreneur, a teacher, a transformational coach, a speaker, and an author who was diagnosed with a brain tumor in 2011. His work includes all dimensions of human health and well-being, and he integrates psychological wholeness with spiritual awakening, science with spirituality, reason with intuition, and personal well-being with collective evolution and social justice. Will's first book, Blessed with a Brain Tumor, shown here, was published in 2014, and his second book, The Gratitude Prescription, Harnessing the Power of Thankfulness for Healing and Happiness, was released in May of last year, 1 year ago. So Will is joining us from his home in Australia to share with us how to cultivate gratitude, joy, and love to be not just a cancer survivor, but a cancer thriver. So with no further ado, please welcome Will Pye. Hi.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that beautiful introduction. It's great to be here.
Great to have you.
And welcome everyone to this webinar. It's really curious for me. I can sense everyone's presence, and of course I can't see you. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for engaging with this online experience that's very much of our times. And there's the opportunity to ask questions as we proceed through our time together. Mary will field those and present them to me. So feel free to say hi, to make comments, to ask questions, and they'll pop up on our screen, I believe, and Mary can coordinate that. So to begin with, I thought it would be beautiful to actually just invite a short meditation. So I invite you to find a comfortable position if you're not already sitting comfortably. And I invite us to just take a few deep breaths, to come into contact with our breath. Noticing how the breathing feels in the body right now. Whether it's the top of the lip or the rise and fall of the chest. Just taking a few moments to come into contact with our breathing and also with our body. And whatever we notice in the body, just bringing easy, curious awareness to any sensations that we encounter. A simple experience of enjoying the body and enjoying the breath. And to bring our meditation to completion, I invite you to take a few breaths intentionally into the center of the body, into the heart. And if it helps, we might place a hand in the center of our chest. And just enjoying a few breaths into the center of the body, into the heart, as if we had a mouth or a nose here. And to bring our meditation to completion, I invite you to thank yourself in whatever way feels appropriate or easy for you for giving yourself the gift of that little meditation and giving yourself the gift of showing up to our session today, exploring the power of joy, gratitude, and love in healing. It's a real honor and privilege to be connecting with you all on such sacred territory, on such sacred ground. And as Mary has shared, I was diagnosed. I'm just going to share a little bit of my background and story, and then we'll jump into a few of the what I feel are key learnings and key teachings around healing, which will include sharing some really powerful, simple, enjoyable practices for creating healing. And it feels helpful to clarify just before I go into my story, just to expand the title that we're speaking of. When I speak of healing, this is something not necessarily the same as curing. So to become healed, to be healed, is to allow wholeness, to experience wholeness. It may be very closely related with affecting cure in our health experience as well. And it's also distinct to experience wholeness, to allow all that we are to be welcomed, to be loved, to be accepted, to be integrated. And my journey of healing really began before I was diagnosed with what initially was thought to be a low-grade tumor back in 2011. And then a couple of years later, once I'd had brain surgery and a pathology test of the cells from what was removed in that brain surgery, brain cancer. And taking a little bit of a step back before that diagnosis, I've always been fascinated by the nature of reality, by mind-body medicine, by consciousness, by energy healing. And so for about 10 years prior to my diagnosis, I'd been practicing meditation. I'd been studying, interestingly, things like spontaneous remissions. I've been studying energy healing. I thought just out of a curiosity as to what consciousness was all about and what was possible with such modalities as energy healing. And of course, all of these practices and all of this research and all of this insight and knowledge that I had accumulated over those 10 years suddenly took on a great significance when I was diagnosed in 2011. The way the news came to me, I was running on a treadmill. I'd just completed 20 minutes. I felt so great that I put another 5 minutes onto the treadmill and continued to run. And then I began to feel what I now know to be an aura, an altered state of consciousness. And it felt really unpleasant. Yeah, sometimes we might have an adjusted state of consciousness from a glass of wine, for example, that feels pleasant. But in this instance, there was like, oh, this is something wrong. And I attempted to jump off the treadmill, and in so doing, lost consciousness and had a grand mal seizure. And came back to awareness with two people sitting on the floor of the gym in my apartment building. They were looking at me very, very intently. You know, what's he going to do next? And soon after, I ended up at the hospital. And I remember the moment where the doctor said to me, we found a lump in your brain. And from the get-go, for me, there was this great intense fascination, curiosity, deep curiosity, like, wow, what's going on here? What's this all about? And a sense of peace. There was, in my experience, when I was both diagnosed with the tumor, then also later on diagnosed with it being cancerous, which happened after the surgery, there was this abiding peace. In fact, after the surgery, so 2 years after the diagnosis, my father asked me, I explained to him that I'd just spoken with the neuro-oncological nurse. Well, actually, no, it was the neurological nurse at that point. And she said to me, we'll have to get you booked in for the neurological clinic. Or the, yeah, I think that's what she said. And we'll also need to get you booked in for the oncology clinic the next day. And I said, oh, at this point it had been thought to be a low-grade non-cancerous tumor. I said, oh, that gives me some information, doesn't it? And she said, yes. So that was the rather relaxed way, if you like. By the way, we'll need to get you booked in for the oncology clinic, that I came to know that the tumor was cancerous, that the results were indicative of a stage 3 tumor. And my for those of you who are interested, an oligodendroma astrocytoma, I believe that was the correct pathological terms or pathology terms. And my father said to me soon after that conversation, he said, how are you feeling? And initially I was just feeling disappointment because I had a schedule. I had work to do. I had projects to fulfill. And here was news that was likely going to result in further treatment. I had radiotherapy treatment after the surgery for 6 weeks. And my dad said, yeah, and what else are you feeling? Which is rather beautiful that my father, an Englishman of his generation, has been coached sufficiently by his son on this healing and awakening journey that he would really drop in with my feeling. And curiously, I felt peace. And as I became aware of the peace, as I just dropped into my experience of being, there was a feeling of great gratitude that I was able to feel peace and an absence of any stress or suffering at this point, an overwhelming gratitude that that there was no suffering or stress in this experience. And a lot of that has been trained and cultivated over years of meditation and practicing yoga and embodiment practices and so on. And to rewind a little bit so that gives you a sort of broad overview of the sort of clinical journey, if you like, initial diagnosis of low-grade tumor, low-grade glioma. I felt from the outset that I didn't want to rush into brain surgery, and others felt that I should straight away. I remember seeing a neurologist in Australia, and he said to me, what are you doing here in his office? You should be on the surgery table right now. I remember thinking, seeing as I'm paying you $250 for this 15-minute consultation, you should probably be a little bit more gracious, but I didn't say that. But what I'm pointing to is that there was pressure to have surgery immediately. But my sense, my intuition, my feeling was that there was no urgent need to have surgery. And so I asked for another scan after a further 3 months down from when I'd had the first scan, to be sure that my intuitive sense that there was no immediate threat or danger to my life was valid. And indeed, the scan showed much of what had been there 3 months before. So that provided an empirical data set to confirm my intuitive sense that there was no immediate threat. And I had some time to explore alternative methods of creating health and healing. And so for that 2 years from that initial diagnosis to then having surgery, I focused 100% just on healing and embarked on a number of different practices. I became a raw vegan for a while before I realized that for my body, that wasn't the right way to go. It was a great experience for a couple of months, but I realized also that it wasn't necessary. And in fact, veganism isn't ideal for my body. Funnily enough, in fact, I'd been a vegetarian for 8 years, and I decided soon after my diagnosis that my body wanted to be eating meat again. So that was what was true for me. Organic, grass-fed. Here in Australia, I'm very fortunate that we have kangaroo and wallaby meat, which is an animal that lives a full and happy life. It's totally free range, totally organic, no farming, no antibiotics or hormones or whatever. And I sensed that for me, the diet was not such a key thing because I'd already been eating wonderfully well anyway. So I didn't see that as being such a big sort of lever that I could pull. You know, if we've had a very rough diet, a very bad diet, of course, just changing that might be enough to change the terrain of the body such that the cancer or any other health condition we're facing could resolve itself from that alone. For me, I sense it wasn't just about diet. I explored all sorts of alternative supplementation. I remember shark cartilage was in there and so on. I experimented with a lot of different approaches, a lot of energy healing, both myself, practicing on myself. I did medical qigong for about 4 hours a day for several months and experienced a lot of very profound energetic openings. I was fortunate enough to study with Mingtong Gu. I imagine with this UCSF webinar that there would be a few of you at least who are up in the over the Bay Bridge, or over the Golden Gate Bridge rather. Mingtong Gu used to run his medical healing qigong out of the IONS campus up there towards is it towards Navatu? I forget. It's been a while since I've been over in the US. Not just with the lockdown in the last few months. He now teaches out at New Mexico, I believe. So medical qigong for me was a very powerful practice that both supported physical, mental well-being and physical health, and opening up the energetic system of the body to support cure and healing. And there were particular practices I did that were focused on the head, on the brain. So that was one thing. I also saw a lot of energy healers. I was fortunate enough to be able to access a fair few very skilled individuals to inform that process of healing. And I remember I was led to a healer in actually, it turned out also in California. It's all happening in California. If you guys are, I don't know if it's everyone on this call that is located in California, but I imagine it's a majority, if not. You're well positioned, as you know, for integrative health approaches and for energy healers and for psychotherapy and counseling and all these sorts of things. And I found myself in this energy healing seminar that I'd very synchronistically been led towards. And this healer, he looked at me and he said, "You just need to receive the love of your father." And as he said that, something landed very, very deep in me. It sort of seemed to unlock something in my system. And I recall tears started to just very gently stream down my face. And being an Englishman, I sensed there was a lot of emotion about to be released. So I said, "Excuse me." And I went off to my room at the hotel, and I experienced this overwhelming release of grief as I recognized the truth of what he had said, that I hadn't received the love of my father. And in this healer's perspective, the body mirror system, as he called it, anything to do with the brain, to do with the head, whether it's a brain tumor or Parkinson's or whatever, is associated with acute tensions in consciousness related to our relationship with physical father, the divine, however we conceive or do not conceive of it, and relationship with authority. When this healer said that to me, it was like tick, tick, tick. I could see how there'd been really acute tensions along the way. My parents divorced when I was 11 to 13, and the anger I felt towards the God that I prayed to for that not to happen, and to the father who I held responsible for that divorce was pretty strong. So this really landed and made sense in my body and in my journey, that there was something to explore here, that if I was able to create healing around receiving the love of my physical father and the divine God, we could say, this would be powerful in affecting healing. And I went off to my room and had that incredible cathartic release. And then the next day called my father and acknowledged in conversation that for the last 20 years, I hadn't updated my 11, 12, 13-year-old boy view, and I really hadn't been receiving his love. And perhaps you can imagine how significant this was for my father to hear. We both cried, and I felt this extraordinary, it felt like tears rising up my temples. And of course, I know gravity means that tears don't go up, but nonetheless, there was this extraordinary sensation. Felt very pleasant. And the next day, I found out what that sensation likely was. I had another healing session booked in, and I thought I had done the healing work with this gentleman, a really great healer called Dan Lappin. He's up in Mill Valley. I recommend him. The work I had done with him was centered around releasing rage and fury and anger. So for me, a big part of healing is to process, to integrate our strong emotional charges that we may have repressed or not being able to fully feel or integrate. And though I felt I had done my work with Dan, as it were, something drew me to go along nonetheless to that session the next day. And almost before we'd said hello and so on, he very soon, before I'd said anything about what had happened the day before, said to me, very interestingly, we have oxytocin hormone producing glands here and vasopressin hormone producing glands here, or it could be vice versa, I don't quite recall. And oxytocin, as you would be aware, is the love hormone, particularly prevalent in the female of our species, although in both men and women. And vasopressin, alternatively, is more dominant in the male species. And it's about boundaries and protecting our mate and so on. So it felt very meaningful to learn that this physiological response to this turning of the key, as it were, to really receive the love of my father had resulted in a physiological response. I must admit, at the time I thought, great, job done, that's it, that's the key. The brain will now heal itself, cure itself in response to the acute tension in consciousness being resolved. Didn't quite turn out that way, but certainly that was a breakthrough in my healing. And the receiving love is so key in this. It's something I really want to emphasize, that we can be surrounded by love, but we might be blocking it off. We might not be fully receiving it, just as we might be breathing, but not fully breathing, not really breathing fully into our belly. In fact, I'd say one great way to develop a receptivity to love is breath work, is to cultivate breath of depth into our full system, such that we're fully receiving the oxygen, the breath that is life-giving, that we could say is spirit itself. To be inspired is to, etymologically speaking, to recognize that we are being breathed by the divine. And so breath work has been a really, really beautiful practice upon my healing journey. And when I share a little bit about some of the key teachings and learnings I'd like to share with you, that's one of the practices we'll touch on as well. So that was probably, I felt, one of the great turning points in my healing journey. There were many others, but I think along with the Qigong work, that would be a couple of the key ones. And I mentioned that I was very much synchronistically guided to those experiences. The way that life supported my healing was really beautiful and remarkable to behold, and that's a lot of what I share in my first book, in Blessed with a Brain Tumor, the gift of guidance is one of the first chapters, the first seven, the first half of the book's chapters. And it shares how synchronistic phenomena showed up to guide my healing journey. And when I was diagnosed, what was really important to me, I want to dwell on this for a moment, was my self-diagnosis. I understand the placebo effect very well. I had been studying mind-body medicine, as I indicated, and so I knew it was important that the meaning that I gave, the beliefs that I started to cultivate, would be very important, causative. And so, though I just about recall the pathology results, it actually took a little bit of recall to remember, because the words that the doctors used to describe the pathology, the cells, is not so important to me, not so significant. What was more significant is the meaning that I gave and the narrative that I told about this diagnosis. So very early on, the diagnosis, I sort of asked and listened, what's the meaning of this? What's the deeper truth here? And what came through was that this tumor was a gift from a spirit, or from my soul. I didn't really have concepts of spirit or soul at the time, believe it or not. But nonetheless, that's what came through. They're a gift from spirit, or a gift from my soul. If spirit is a troublesome concept, then perhaps it's a gift from life, or a gift from my soul. And through the healing and creating transformation and awakening, I deepen my understanding of healing, transformation, and awakening, such that I can serve others in their healing, transformation, and awakening. And that's been true for the last, 9 years now. I've been fortunate to write a couple of books, as Mary has said, to become a coach and lead workshops, and I'm creating online courses at the moment as well. I have a group coaching program coming up called Alchemy of Cancer, in fact, that is taking participants. If anyone's interested, then please feel free to reach out to me. And that deeper meaning has been significant, and I believe causative. It has minimized anxiety, minimized stress, and helped create support, peace, and well-being in the body. And of course, we know that peace and happiness in the body, we know psychoneuroimmunologically speaking, that is a powerful basis for physical well-being and physical healing. And an interesting perspective was offered to me a while back. A gentleman got in contact via Facebook. He was doing some sort of analysis of people's brain tumors, and he asked me what my pathology results were, and I couldn't actually remember at the time. I had to really think deeply. What was that long word and that other word? And he said to me, well, it seems that you've turned your brain tumor into an income-producing asset, so I congratulate you on that. So I rather like the humor of that. I rather like this notion that the brain tumor had been turned into an income-producing asset. It's a book, so it's not an asset that produces much income, but some nonetheless. And certainly that sort of alchemy, if you like, of turning something potentially very bad into something good is been a lesson, part of my philosophy that I've learned well before being diagnosed with a brain tumor. It was also true when I experienced addiction early on in my life and depression. My fundamental belief is that everything that happens is an opportunity for learning and growth, for spiritual expansion, we could say. And there was an excitement around the diagnosis from that perspective, that the potential learning from this is huge. The potential growth from this is absolutely huge, whether that be through creating healing and creating health, or simply facing my own death, really becoming comfortable with my own mortality, becoming surrendered to my physical mortality. And so that 2 years of healing helped me reach a point where it felt safe and timely to now have surgery. I had another scan, and it indicated that perhaps something was happening with the tumor. My first thought was, well, it's healing happening. The neurosurgeon thought probably it was the tumor growing, or possibly the tumor growing. And so I chose to have surgery. And that was what my intuition guided me to. And I want to emphasize as well that just as I was careful to consciously give meaning to the diagnosis, to self-diagnose, I was careful not to make any possible treatment option bad. So I didn't make chemotherapy or radiotherapy or surgery bad in my mind, because I knew that that would be creating a negative placebo effect, that a sort of nocebo effect that would be undesirable. So I've been careful to keep surgery neutral, and then I had a conscious craniotomy. And that was an extraordinary experience, to say the least. I joke with people that they saw me coming. It was a conscious craniotomy. And of course, in California, you'd well know that if you want to market something to spiritual folk, then you just put conscious on the front, conscious chocolate, conscious parenting, whatever it might be. So of course, I was keen to have a conscious craniotomy, a stunning experience. Very fortunate to have great healthcare, Adam Brooks Hospital in the UK, great neurosurgical team. And it was during the surgery that the neurosurgeon said, that's got higher grade written all over it. And although I didn't actually find out confirmation until I'd had that conversation with the nurse, really at that point, I knew, I hoped that the neurosurgeon didn't have very good visual diagnostic skills, but of course I knew that what he said indicated that it was a higher grade tumor. So my being alive after over 9 years now is certainly a statistical outlier. I didn't look at what these long words the doctor said meant, because, as I say, it's not so significant for me, the languaging the doctors use. Some people get diagnosed with glioblastomas and cure it completely and live for the rest of their life. So the statistics aren't significant for me or relevant for me. My own meaning making and conscious placebo effect is something that I was more interested in. But I did look online a little while back, and I saw that the average life expectancy apparently with one of these two pathology results that I got was 2.5 years. And I was very happy that I hadn't looked at that when I'd been initially diagnosed. It might have been a bit more stressful. But to read it after 8 or 9 years, I was like, oh wow, I'm already a statistical outlier. I'm already have affected a miracle healing of sorts. And one of the things that I'm hoping to impart to all of us today is that spontaneous remissions or miracle healings aren't spontaneous. The people that create these outlier results do so by doing things differently to the majority. And one of the books I always recommend is Radical Remissions by Dr. Kelly Turner. She actually got the data from IONS, the wonderful Edgar Mitchell founded group up in California there. And that book really offers a bit of a summary of what extraordinary health outcome people did that was extraordinary. There's 9 main points in Kelly's book there, and I think it's probably fair to say we can now shift into the key learnings and teachings that I want to share with you today. I think that probably completes the little narrative, the story of my experience over the last 10 years or so. And of course, if there are any questions that arise, then please feel free to ask, and Mary can pass them on. So there's 3 key points points or insights or learnings that I would like to share with you today. And the first one is to emphasize the power of placebo and thus the power of self-diagnosis. To recognize that the meaning that we give, the perceptions that we hold, and the beliefs that we have are significant and causative. And we can choose to really cultivate that. We can choose to tell a story to give meaning to our diagnosis, to our particular health diagnosis that is in support of what we want to create, in support of health, in support of healing. So I encourage each of us to really consider that. And I know for many people, I was fortunate enough to lecture around the US on a few tours before such travel became impossible. And what I was really heartened to find was how many cancer patients said something similar to what I share, which is, in many respects, a cancer diagnosis was the best thing that ever happened to them. It was a permission, it was an invitation to creating profound transformation, not just health, but profound transformation in the whole of their life. It allowed people to review relationships, to maybe change their diet, to make significant changes in their life that ultimately led to a post-cancer experience, a post-cancer diagnosis experience of greater health, greater happiness, and greater healing, to greater well-being as an individual. And I offer that as a perspective that potentially a cancer diagnosis can be a route into greater health than you've ever experienced, and so on and so on. And as I say, my self-diagnosis was that this was a gift, that it was an opportunity to deepen my understanding of healing, transformation, and awakening, such that I could serve others in their healing, transformation, and awakening. And yeah, that feels really good. That feels really exciting. And as I say, so it is. It has been proven to be true. So self-diagnosis, recognizing the power of placebo, is one learning I'd like to share. I think the power of placebo is one of the most underutilized and overlooked scientific facts. It's the most recurrent fact in medical research. Creates problems for pharmaceutical companies in many respects for their research. And also, what was in my awareness, and I would point to, is the study of psychoneuroimmunology, what we know about the effects upon the immune response and the robustness of our health as determined by our mental health, our general well-being. And two of the 9 factors that Dr. Kelly Turner recognizes in radical remissions, one is to enhance positive emotions, and the other is to integrate, to heal negative emotions. And so I touched a little bit how for me that meant very much dealing with grief and with anger. Integrating grief and anger was a big part of my healing, and resolving depression was very much interrelated with that. And then the flip side, to accentuate positive emotions, to cultivate gratitude, love, and joy. And the good news, of course, with this as a medicine, gratitude, love, and joy are really pleasant to take. Their side effects are massively positive. And I found that in my experience with most healthcare professionals that I spoke with, there was a real underemphasis upon this attitude, mental, emotional aspect to creating health and healing. Maybe it's a bit different in California. I think a lot of the healthcare in your part of the world is a little bit more evolved and progressive than perhaps in some places. Certainly the science is very clear that our developing the capacity to receive love, to cultivate joy, is causative in creating health and well-being. So self-diagnosis, placebo effect, psychoneuroimmunology, for me, they're all rather interrelated. The scientific data and principles and research that support why it's so important for us to cultivate receiving love. Now, receiving love, I mentioned receiving love from my father as being important, also from my friends, from my mother, from my sister, from life itself. This morning and most days, I walk out onto the lawn, onto the bare earth, connecting my feet with the electromagnetic frequency of the earth. We know from earthing and grounding, there's a powerful anti-inflammatory effect from as little as 20 minutes of connecting barefoot with the earth that can have measurable anti-inflammatory effects. And of course, we all, I imagine, would have some understanding of the connectedness between acute inflammation and cancer, or certainly the validity and power of an anti-inflammatory response in the body as being supportive of general health and dealing with issues such as cancer. So I connect with the earth, and I open my heart, literally open my heart, and I breathe in thanks. I take a moment to thank the day, to thank the beauty. I'm very fortunate to be here amongst much beauty in rural Victoria of Australia, and to actually take a moment to really absorb and breathe that in. So I'd say it's probably a sort of three-pronged approach. There's an absorbing the beauty, right? To actually really take some moments to just soak in the beauty. To breathe fully, as I alluded to before, to take a deep breath, and to become fully embodied, to who knows where I've been in my dreams or overnight, so to actually really bring awareness into my body. The opening of the heart, the Qigong movements and so on is a beautiful way of bringing awareness into the body. So that, for me, is an application of placebo effect. It's an application of what we know from psychoneuroimmunology, and it's a beautiful way to start the day. The second key point that I really wanted to give some emphasis to is around our intuition and stepping into our sovereignty. So our intuition is part of our intelligence. What we know from, as well as IONS over there in California, you have the Institute of Heart Math, another wonderful non-profit that does extraordinary research into neurocardiology. And what we know from neurocardiological discovery is a few things. One is that we have brain in our gut, we have neurology in our gut, we have brain and neurology in our heart, as well as, of course, in our cranium, in our head brain. What neurocardiology also points to is that there is an electromagnetic charge emanating from our heart that is 60 times more powerful than the electromagnetic frequency emanating from our head brain. And in fact, the magnetic frequency of that is 5,000 times more powerful in the heart than in the head. In addition, there is more information, more data, more energy flowing up the vagus nerve from the heart into the head brain than vice versa, heading down. So what that suggests to me is that perhaps in positioning the head brain or the thinking mind as the forefront of our intelligence, as the seat of our intelligence, it's rather true to say that our intelligence is immersed throughout our body, and that perhaps there is a greater power of intelligence in the heart and in the gut. And we experience this through gut feeling and through intuition, through the heart. Sometimes our gut just knows, sometimes our heart just knows through intuition. And cultivating this intuitive capacity is a really helpful way to navigate the healthcare system and to navigate conflicting advice from parents or friends or family, from different specialists, might be saying different things. So for me, intuition guided me to not have surgery and guided me to many different healers and so on. And then ultimately it guided me to have surgery. After 2 years, it felt that I had done the healing work such that the root cause, if you like, or the acute tension in consciousness correlated with the physical manifestation had been resolved. And now I could simply take care of the physical manifestation and be confident that that would, in effect, create a cure. And time will tell. Cross fingers. I trust and I hope. Certainly my experience is perfect health and well-being, and scans are good, so I'm comfortable and confident in that. So the intuition is beyond a sort of false dichotomy of alternative healthcare good and traditional healthcare bad, these sorts of very unhelpful black and white thinking. Each of us is unique, and our body, our intuitive sense, knows what's right for us. And indeed, in Dr. Kelly Turner's work, Radical Remissions, that was the overriding principle. So she had 9 different factors that no single person utilized all 9 factors, but they were the ones that amongst the thousands of people that had affected spontaneous remissions that she spoke to, these were the things that she extracted from all those interviews that summed up the different reasons people said they had created an outlier health result. The one thing that united them all was a willingness to apply intuition when it came to treatment options. So for me, as I say, that was in one moment to not have conventional healthcare, was not to go down the surgery route, and then it was to go down the surgery route. Radiotherapy felt good for me. Again, I've been careful not to make that bad. I used cannabis oil, fairly strong cannabis oil, in as a complementary treatment with the radiotherapy, and found that to be very helpful. And I feel that it was both minimizing the side effects, the negative side effects of the radiotherapy, and I believe supporting the positive effects of that treatment as well. My intuition has said to me that chemotherapy is not appropriate or right or helpful for me. And indeed, my genetic marker would indicate that that wouldn't be likely to have any therapeutic benefit. Intriguingly, the oncologist still suggested that I take chemotherapy, even though he had himself said that it's unlikely to have any therapeutic benefit, which was slightly curious. So when we're getting that sort of advice from an intelligent, caring healer, that's when we need to be able to rely upon our intuition and go with our intuition. It might be that it's not just the conflicting evidence or advice from a doctor, but it could be our family wants us to go down a particular route. Again, our intuition and following our intuition is a really powerful way to tap into the body's intelligence of what is most helpful for our unique circumstance. There is a beautiful side effect, as it were, with cultivating that intuitive capacity, which is a good way to be guided in life in general. To follow our own intuitive sense with what work we do, or whether to deepen into this relationship or not. It's a very beautiful intelligence to activate, to integrate the heart with the head. So we're utilizing critical thinking and logic, rational thought, but it's integrated with our feeling sense, with our intuitive sense. And this, for me, is a truly intelligent human being, a human that's activated their intelligence throughout the whole body, their gut, their heart, and their critical thinking capacities, and their logic and their rational thought through their thinking as well. So if the first of the sort of 3 key principles is self-diagnosis and activating the power of placebo and psychoneuroimmunology in your favor. The second would be harnessing intuition, cultivating intuition. And that does involve a journey in consciousness from the head down into the heart. So this is something that's going to be supported by various intuitive practices that you can undertake, intuition cultivating practices, and also, of course, body practices such as exercise, running, or yoga or qigong that bring awareness down into the body, and indeed emotional healing, emotional work, whether that be inner child work or psychotherapeutic work or maybe a plant spirit medicine journey, whatever it is that is part of your journey of opening the heart and refining your capacity to feel, to actually feel fully. The third little area I wanted to focus on is to really just share my favorite practices for cultivating love, joy, and gratitude. So if hopefully over my sort of sharing my journey, sharing a little bit of my diagnosis and self-diagnosis, that's offered some information. We've got some key principles there in the placebo effect and psychoneuroimmunology as to why it's important to cultivate love, gratitude, and joy. And we've talked about how intuition can be a guiding light, our guidance system to making wise choices that are true for our body. And what I'd like to drop into now is really just sharing some practical and fun means, measures, techniques that we can utilize to cultivate joy, gratitude, and love. So my second book is called The Gratitude Prescription, and as the title would suggest, is really about how to utilize gratitude as a medicine. I continue to be stunned by the growing scientific data, much of it accumulated at the Berkeley University, what's it called? The Center for Greater Good. For some reason, I'm jumbling the words. The Science for Greater Good, Center for Science for Greater Good, something like that. Greater Good Science Center, I think. It's where all these wonderful people, such as Dr. Rick Hansen and others, are exploring the scientific research and finding the evidence why gratitude can have positive effects on mental health, physical health, and also social health. Those of us that really practice gratitude tend to be better citizens. We tend to be more charitable. We tend to be more giving. We tend to be kinder, and so on. So gratitude is an extraordinarily powerful way of creating transformation. And there's lots of tools and practices in the Gratitude Prescription, the book. And I've literally just in the last few days released an online course. If anyone on this call would like to test my first two online courses, the meditation game and the Gratitude Prescription, I'd love to give you access for half price in order that you give me some feedback at the end of it, and I can refine those courses and improve them if there's potential for that. But let me just share a few of my favorites right now. One is very simply, this is kind of like the gold standard, is to keep a gratitude journal, and in the morning and in the evening, list 3 things that we're feeling appreciation for. That could be both something that's present now. It could be I'm grateful for the sun, I'm grateful for the butterflies, I'm grateful for my sight that can see and appreciate. It could be that I'm looking to the day ahead. I'm grateful that I'm going to have this wonderful webinar with the wonderful community of UCSF later on today. That might have been my appreciation this morning. And then, of course, at the end of the day, we can look back at the day and highlight those things that we feel appreciation for. The embodied practice I've shared already that I start most days with is to go outside, connect with the earth, open my heart, and say thank you. Thank you for this day. Thank you for another day. Thank you for this moment. Thank you for this breath. Thank you for this breathing. So we could say we practice through the morning and evening. We practice with the journaling. The science does indicate that to write creates a greater, fuller, embodied experience, a greater integration of that gratitude. And of course, gratitude is something that we feel. It is something that we feel. We can think grateful thoughts, but ultimately gratitude is a feeling, and one that we may need some practice to cultivate. Throughout my journey, I've felt lucky in every sense and respect. So I felt lucky that it was a low-grade glioma when it was thought to be so. I felt lucky and grateful that it was not too bad a sort of stage 3 when it was thought to be that. There are worse types of stage 3, apparently, according to the doctors. I felt lucky and grateful that I was able to access healthcare. I know in the US it's a little bit of a less intelligent system, to say the least. In Australia and in the UK, I was able to get free healthcare, as is everyone's right. And I've felt lucky that my family has been so supportive. I felt lucky to have the health care professionals that I've had. Though within a system that's corrupted and hugely flawed, every single healthcare professional that I encountered, without exception, maybe one actually, but almost without exception, is a healer. You know, first and foremost, they're there to heal. And that gratitude, the seeing the good, is such an important mental health technique to really see in a way that's balanced. Those of you that know a great teacher and friend of mine, Dr. Rick Hansen, know that he points out that we have this negativity bias. We are inclined perhaps neurologically towards the negative. And so gratitude is a necessary sort of, just as our muscles, our body is inclined to entropy, to fatigue and so on if we don't use it. We could say, so therefore exercise is a necessary practice for good physical health. We could say that gratitude is a necessary practice for good mental health. It counters the negativity bias of the brain, and perhaps we could say of our culture and the media and so on, which tends to stimulate fear and so on. So gratitude is a way to actually see more clearly all the good that is around us. So I mentioned the topping and tailing the day with gratitude. I've mentioned the embodied practice out on Mother Earth, ideally. Though of course, if that's not possible, if you're in an apartment, the carpet's perfectly fine, or you could get a grounding mat from Earthing or grounding.com, I think, and connect with the electromagnetic frequency of the earth and practice appreciating being, appreciating breath. We can also, of course, practice gratitude and enhance our relationships by expressing our appreciation to those that are looking after us, to our loved ones, to our family members. One of the first things that I did, so I was advised, having been diagnosed, to get my affairs in order. I'm going to pour myself some nice green tea here. As you would likely know, green tea is one of the many delicious things that we can consume that has anti-cancer properties. For me, getting my affairs in order meant making a will, which fortunately I don't have any sort of great complexity of financial existence. That was fairly simple. Half to mum, half to dad. Debts are no one's. And the other thing that was important for me was to create a clarity of communication with my family. And so I sat them down and I expressed how grateful I was to each of them for everything that we've experienced together, including the divorce and all the trauma and problems that created. That all of it had been part of my journey of awakening and part of my ultimate growth as a human being, and that no one should feel any guilt or regret on my account, certainly, and that my love for them and appreciation for them is huge and immense and entirely unconditional. So this practice of gratitude, of gratefulness for our friends and family, expressing our appreciation. The great thing about giving love, like giving a hug, is of course that we receive it simultaneously. And so when we're expressing our love and appreciation for people, we're creating a very positive experience for our nervous system, for our body. So that's another practice, is to really expand and make even more conscious our appreciation that we express for our friends, our family, our healthcare professionals as well. You know, including my oncologist who has given me some questionable advice at times, but I deeply appreciate him, and I deeply appreciate his dedication to studying medicine and to working so hard as a doctor, and you know, putting himself in that position to be one of my team on my journey of creating health and healing. So there's a few gratitude practices, and I guess that sort of moved into love practices as well. For me, I see gratitude and love as actually being very interlinked, because we could say, I've touched earlier in this time together, that there's a difference between being loved and receiving love. And maybe a nice example is when you see someone is given a compliment, but they can't actually receive it. They deflect it. They say, "Oh no, I'm not here." And so you can start there. When someone compliments you, when someone says, "That's a great dress you're wearing," or "I just love the way you're so generous with people," own it. Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah. No need to deflect. No need to play small. So just as we might absorb and receive the truth of compliments, we can absorb and receive the truth that we're being breathed right now. We're being breathed right now. We're being given in each moment breath. And of course, there's this beautiful practice of opening to receive that more fully that I've touched on. And in breath work, that's what we're really doing, whether that's breath work via yoga or qigong or a particular form of breath work, transformational breath, for example. That's been a really key practice for me in integrating powerful emotion. I touched on in Radical Remission how integrating painful emotions, grief or anger, is an important part of the healing journey. And for me, breath work has been the most powerful tool, and transformational breath in particular. We connect the breath. Usually we breathe in and then there's a pause before we breathe out. No other mammal does that. That pause seems to be a human invention. And in connecting the breath, we create a wonderful oxygenation of the blood, and we create a distraction of the thinking mind such that emotional content can arise up into awareness and be integrated in a very powerful but simple and safe way. So another practice I would recommend to cultivate love, joy, and gratitude, in fact, is breath work. And my favorite form is transformational breath. There's a beautiful book called The Presence Process by Michael Brown. And that takes people on a journey over 10 weeks of utilizing breath morning and evening. And if that feels like something that's really ripe for your exploration, and that emotional healing is something that you feel you may need to give attention to, I would recommend The Presence Process and Michael Brown's work with that book. It's a very beautiful self-guided reading journey with this course that it integrates as well. So that for me would be an integration of love, gratitude, and joy. The joy for me is something that is allowed to naturally arise when we are open to all the flavor of emotions and experiences. So if I am able, not to wallow in, but to really feel my grief, or to feel anger, or to feel shame, or to feel guilt, all of these different feelings that likely as a human being moving through life we will have encountered intensely and deeply at some point, but may not have had the capacity at the time to fully feel and absorb. This is necessary. When there's nothing that I am unwilling to feel, when I'm willing to feel depression, when I'm willing to feel all of the variety of emotional experiences in a human body, then there's a great spaciousness, and then there's a great peace, and then there's a joy that naturally arises from being. And of course, we can cultivate that through play as well, to reconnect with our childish innocence. I don't know if you can hear my flatmate's son just in the background, that was rather timely. We can play, we can go outside and dance under the rain, we can absorb the beauty, we can go out into the forest much as a child would and look around, look at the mushrooms, look at the trees and the leaves, and admire the way that light and dewdrops interact and so on. Reclaim that innocence of the child, if you like. And in this, there is great joy to be found in my experience. So hopefully there's a few tips and tools and techniques, that one or few of which will resonate with you, that you can utilize in your day-to-day existence amongst all that. I hope I've managed to get the right balance of not overwhelming with too much information whilst giving enough information. And that sort of covers the three categories, at least as a starting point. I can expand in any one of them if there's an interest, but it feels like it might be a good point to open up to questions, to see if there are any comments. It'd be lovely just to hear someone say something, to know that someone's been listening all this time. Any comments or questions, perhaps?
So actually, what we're going to do is have people type their questions into the chat box, and I'll just do a quick questions here in case anyone's chat box is not already showing up. That should make it appear. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, I actually have a couple that I would like to bring up. First of all, I want to thank you for the beautiful, heartfelt, wonderful sharing, and opening your heart, and just being so generous with your experience and your thoughts and your philosophies on this whole process. It's been really wonderful, so I want to thank you. My first question is, I love that you said cancer, you perceive cancer as an invitation to transformation. It's so rich and so huge and so deep. And I've heard this expression that I really like. Breakdown can be a catalyst to break through, but it does require a certain conscious choice. And I don't want to minimize the depth or the intensity of anyone's breakdown. I want to honor that, everyone's diagnosis is serious. But also, I like the invitation of seeing it as a catalyst to break through. So the people who are attending, of course, many, if not most, if they have not had a cancer diagnosis, some will be caregivers who are also, that's its own crisis. So on top of that whole background, now we have COVID, which for many people has kind of reactivated that trauma of this came out of nowhere. Excuse me, once again, I have to stay in my home, especially now more than the average person. So I'm wondering if you can kind of address our current pandemic situation under the auspices of, using this as an invitation to transformation, or sheltering in place and whatnot?
Yeah, that's a great invitation to explore, and I think I would suggest that collectively the pandemic experience, is an invitation to transformation. And with COVID-19, as with cancer, a key part of that invitation is to engage with our mortality, with our fear of death, with our fear of bodily cessation. And we know that fear is not a helpful, so it's helpful in a very small percentage of situations. You know, if there's a bus moving towards you, or you're on the end of a cliff, and we have these intelligent, incorporated into the body fears that preserve us. And of course, we know with modern trauma research and that fight-flight activations can be a real challenge to then undo as we evolve and grow as adults. I was fortunate in my childhood. I had a little bit of trauma, but not too much. I think in the sense that I didn't have a huge karmic load to work through. But what I would say is that those moments, those very few moments where fear is helpful, are the exceptions. Fear is not helpful in COVID. We don't need to be fearful of anything. We can take intelligent action without there being any fear present. For me, my relationship with fear has been deepened. I haven't had a seizure for 8. Actually, no, I've had one seizure in 9 years. I was advised after diagnosis that I'd need to be on anti-seizure medication for the rest of my life, but I looked at you fold out the side effects thing, you suddenly got this like 20-foot by 20-foot map of infinite side effects, and I resolved that wasn't going to be my path. And I've been fortunate with breath, and I feel the natural remedies to avoid having any seizures apart from one in 9 years. What does sometimes still happen is I have what would probably be called in a medical sense a partial seizure. So I get an aura, I get an altered state of consciousness, and it feels like I'm about to have a seizure. And so practically speaking, I'll place myself on the ground. So I don't need to be fearful to take that intelligent action. You know, it's just like there's a pointy desk, I'm going to get down on the floor. That's the safest place to be if I were to have a seizure. But what I've found is that over time, I've had dozens and dozens of these experiences, a physiological fear arises, and I've inquired into that. Like, what am I scared of? I'm scared of having a seizure or dying. And what I have found is it's possible to just surrender to that, to really just die to the fear in that moment, if you like. We could say to love the fear, to love the physiological sensation of like, to really be in that. And I have found consistently that passes. The fear is a momentary bodily response that passes in my own presence. And that's been a great gift for me to have those intense experiences. And fortunately, at this point, touch wood, I haven't had those expand into a full seizure. So I do feel it's also an intelligent treatment intervention at that point, to actually breathe into the fear, to breathe into the intensity of experience, rather than try and avoid it or push it away, either mentally or in any other way.
I think there's research that through mindfulness, just being with the difficult emotions rather than trying to repress them, that they clear faster. and they pass faster. So that's kind of right in alignment. So, if you're feeling fear, feel the fear and allow it to pass through you. And yes, intelligent action is so much more important than the tension of the fear. And there is a lot that we can do, and all that information is out there on how to keep ourselves safe during COVID. We have several questions, and I forgot to mention that when you type a question into chat, it just comes to us, the facilitators. And a couple of them are admin things that I should have mentioned. I'll be sending an email with a bunch of links. The only one that I missed, I have like 8 links, and I know all the organizations and people you'd mentioned, but I did miss the Qigong teacher who was at IONS. What was his name?
Ming Tong Gu. So 2 words. Second word is G-U, and his first name is Ming Tong.
Okay.
M-I-N-G-T-O-N-G.
Okay, so several of the questions were addressing, who was this, what was that, and I'll be sending links for those. We have another question. Did you have any fear upon hearing your diagnosis? How did you deal with that?
Yeah, curiously, on hearing the diagnosis, no, and including when that became a cancer diagnosis, there was no fear. And I think a lot of that is to do with my journey leading up. I've done a lot of meditation, and in meditation in Zazen, a lot of that is sitting with discomfort and being pure awareness, being present to that. And I've done a fair bit of psychospiritual healing prior to that. And then, as I say, when fear has certainly arisen in a bodily sense, I've been compelled to learn how to be with that, and to emphasize that point, to breathe into the fear. So if I'm feeling fear, it might be a case of sort of self-parenting in that moment. It might be to literally put a hand on my heart and just give myself some attention for a few moments. Who knows where that fear is originating from? Is it just a physiological response? Is it my 3-year-old self? Who knows? And so to bring my own presence and perhaps my own physical touch to myself to soothe and to presence has been what I have found to be a helpful, loving response to fear. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another kind of admin question. Will this be recorded? Yes, and I'll send that link afterwards, as well as with the other links. So yes, this is being recorded, and please share it with anyone who may have been interested and wasn't able to join us. Okay, so we have a question. Any tips for managing anxiety? Do you experience this? And if so, how do you manage it? So the anxiety that comes when the scan is coming up and waiting for the results.
I remember my first, no, it would have been my second scan, and I was on the way to the hospital with my father to get the results, to have the consultation. And I'd been experiencing all these sensations in my head, and I remember saying to my dad, I don't think this is going to be good news. I think there's about a dozen up there. I think there's multiple tumors. And I can, of course, smile and look back at that now. As it was exactly as it was 3 months prior. And so what that points to is, in fact, a little bit related to the fear. We have this acronym of fear, false evidence appearing real. So I had sensations. Of course, the body is just sensations. There are sensations everywhere. One of the things we learn in Vipassana meditation is the body is essentially sensation, and those sensations are changing and moving, and pain can very easily disappear all of a sudden. We can be sitting in meditation and our knee feels like it's going to explode, and then all of a sudden in presence it just falls away, and it's no longer anything that we would call pain. So I think keeping in mind that the mind, the thinking mind, often doesn't know what it's talking about. It often really just has no clue as to what's happening. And again, there's the same thing really with anxiety and with fear. I've experienced a lot of depression over the years, not so much anxiety. I think the treatment, I would say, for the two, I would recommend really to be very much similar. They would be practices such, I mean, I've actually recently completed a course called the Alchemy of Depression, which offers a complete holistic integrative approach to creating health naturally. There's a lot to say, but of course things like diet come into this, and I mean diet in the widest sense, not just the food that we're eating or the water that we're drinking or the supplements that we might be taking, but the diet around us. Probably very pertinent right now with COVID. You know, it can be easy just to go onto the internet and just devour all these ever more fearful representations and ideas and narratives. And again, is that helpful? There's some information that is helpful and is useful to know, and it might be helpful to have a sort of, maybe our mind likes to look at the global situation and make comparisons and so on. But if our entertainment diet or our news diet is creating anxiety or is creating discomfort, then that might be something to look at. You know, maybe it's a better habit, rather than jumping onto CNN or Fox News or whatever first thing each morning. I thought I'd offer a nice, politically balanced news choice there. Or maybe a better practice would be to start each day, go outside and connect with the earth and admire the beauty around you and absorb that. In this moment, there's nothing to fear. You know, that's true of 99.99999% of moments, right? Unless the bus is moving towards us at this moment. And so we can have a fearful thought of the scan result, and to come back to presence, to come back to our body, again, to self-parent. You know, it's like, I hear you, sweetie. You know, I get that you're worried. It's okay. I'm with you now. Whatever that might look like as an internal dialogue, as a physiological response. Yeah.
That when you're talking about self-parenting, it reminds me of Neff's work with self-compassion. Yeah, and really being compassionate with yourself and your situation and all that. So really, I'm adding another link to add to that one. So we have a really lovely question. It says, when one experiences a breakthrough and is one step closer to enlightenment, but others around you don't, how do you handle the loneliness associated with that breakthrough you experience alone?
That's a great question.
Isn't that so interesting?
It's one of the beautiful ironies, paradoxes of the spiritual journey, that as we experience what we might call oneness, there can be, or non-separation, that can put us into an experience that's quite distinct and apart from experiences that other people are having. And I would, if I hear the question correctly, if I hear the sort of deeper undercurrent, I'm sensing that it might be around friends and family and how they may be having a very different experience. And I think there's no real difficulty in this. You know, our love for this moment can manifest as the love for this person and the love for their differing experience. If suffering is happening, it would be lovely if it were not. But in our resistance to someone else's suffering, perhaps in relation to our absence of suffering, we are creating a problem that doesn't really exist. So there's this phrase that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? So with our friends and family, if they're open to altering their perspective or view, we can share what might be helpful. We can share a perspective that is helpful. And I guess on a practical note, these days we can connect with community around the world. You know, awakening and expansion of consciousness is a far more common experience now. And so it might be if we're in a small community somewhere or just with our family that there's not a lot of relatability amongst that small circle. But certainly there are lots and lots of teachers and communities that have regular hangouts or online meditations and so on. So it might be that we seek to make that a part of our regular weekly activity to connect with those people.
Yeah. Who is the founder of Mindfulness-Based Cancer Recovery, has daily, Monday through Friday, hour-long talks and meditation. So I'll include that in the links that I send to everyone. And it's been 8 weeks now. I've been participating most days. And it really is because, I mean, there's over 1,000 people, but it's feeling like a community, and people from literally all over the planet. So I think that's a nice resource as well. And I think it is important to, find those resources of like-minded people to feed ourselves, and just our beingness may then influence those around us who are not yet up for that type thing or whatever. But yes, I like finding your resources, and maybe yes, maybe no, you may be a resource for those around you that are still trying to, or still in possibility stage, so to speak. So our last question, because we're at 6:29. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your questions. I got to most of them, but not all of them, and I do apologize if I didn't get to your question. Do you have specific recommendations for practices to help one develop their intuition?
Yes, there's a simple one, and if anyone wants to, if there's a really burning question, feel free to email me at will@willpie.com. With intuition, there's a very simple, you may have heard this idea of a delicious yes, or a hell yes, or a hell no. So when we're faced with a simple question, might be what we're going to be eating at a restaurant, or whether to go this way or that, to really take a moment to pause, to breathe, come into contact with body and being, and to ask, is this a hell yes? Is it an unequivocal yes? And if it's not, it's a no. So we're looking for a clear, embodied yes. And I find this can be quite helpful. Like, do I want to go outside and appreciate the sunshine for a little bit and experience the chill on my skin? Oh yeah, like that's a real yes. Other things might not have that hell yes. Now, of course, life is such that I may still need to do some of those things that don't have the delicious yes, the hell yes happening. There are tasks and chores and so on. But that can be a guide that we can apply also to big decisions, such as what therapy to have or what treatment option to select. And I appreciate the question, because it's something that with the current online course I'm developing is called the Alchemy of Cancer, and one of the features of that is to create a little module that's all about cultivating intuition and having more practices that can give a bit of a training around that. So yeah, thank you for that prompt.
Well, that brings us to the end of our presentation. I would like to thank all of you for attending, and do watch your inbox for an email with a list of several things that have been mentioned here, as well as Will's website and some information about his new program and his 2 books. If we were in person right now, you would be receiving a rousing level of applause. So I would like to just offer that singular, yes, oh, big hugs. And love the self-parenting love to everyone. And yes, you're getting a lot of thank yous in the comments right now.
My great pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, take very good care, and everyone watch for your email. Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah.
Bye-bye.